That's delicious. You probably should get a spoon. Welcome, YouTube. You might be in the market for a new plastering trowel. And you might be wondering, with so many varieties out there, which one should you go for? Now, possibly on your research, you would have noticed, and possibly by the title of the video as well, that there are two main types. That being a stainless steel plastering trowel and that of a carbon steel. What's the difference? Which one's better? Which one should you buy? Now, a disclaimer, I won't tell you which one is better, because when I tell you what the pros and the cons of both are, you'll begin to realize that it is personal preference. But I've noted down just a couple of things as to what makes some of the excellent selling points for each trowel. Now let's start with the stainless steel one. Now this one here is possibly one of the most iconic trowels around, and that is that it's a 14-inch Marshalltown stainless steel perma-shape. These come semi pre-worn in with a nice curve on them. You can, to a certain degree, use these out the box. What's a big selling point with these? These things are bulletproof. You can scrape the floor with them, you can lay on, you can do cement rendering, sand and cement, whatever, K-rend. These will take a battering and still come back for more. Not only that, they will last an awful long time. If looked after, some 20, 30, 40 years. In some cases, it can be the only trowel you need for your entire plastering career, especially if you're using these flexible trowels or plastic trowels to do your last couple of passes. Also, another big selling point, unlike the carbon one, there is no maintenance required with these trowels. So it sounds fantastic, but what are the negatives with a stainless steel trowel? Well, there's only really two, I suppose, or maybe three. The first one being that it takes an awful lot longer to break in. And if anything, that is significantly one of the biggest downsides of these trowels. To properly break in one of these trowels, especially unassisted, where you haven't tried to sharpen it yourself, can take 4 to 5 years to break it in properly, where it will give a superb finish. The other downside is that it doesn't get anywhere near as sharp as the carbon steel trowels. And a minor thing, not terrible, but they also, stainless, tend to be slightly more expensive. Probably be only £5 or £6. It's not an awful lot, nothing to really worry about. So what of the carbon one? Well, this one here, this is a 14-inch Nella carbon trowel, and this one, unlike the Marshalltown, which is about 6 months old, this one is about 4 years old. What are the selling points for this? Why would you consider getting this? Well, one of the best selling features of a carbon trowel is the exact opposite as to why you wouldn't want a stainless steel trowel, and that is how fast these break in. Within 6 months of heavy use, this could give a pretty decent finish, unassisted, so no sharpening required. Also, personally, my own personal preference, because you have surface rust on carbon steel trowels, they tend to roll the plaster off the trowel a little bit better because there's a bit more grip on the trowel, but that's personal preference with myself. The other thing as well is, as mentioned with the stainless, the carbon is significantly sharper. What are the downsides though? Well, these trowels are nowhere near as robust as the stainless steel ones. You wouldn't want to scrape the floor with one of these trowels because they do nick significantly easier than the Marshalltown. The other downside with it, of course, as it's carbon steel, it then subsequently rusts. Now, it's not particularly a big deal for us because we plaster every day. The surface rust never really builds up. You might have a light speckling on the underside of the trowel from the day before, but within a couple of minutes it's gone. And if we're ever not using it for a prolonged period of time, perhaps we're on holiday, then we might use oil on it. So really, they tend to be the pros and the cons of both. You've got how long it takes to break one in versus the maintenance of the other. The other minor thing as well is with the Nella, it won't last as long. With the carbon trowel, it won't last as long because it's sharper, it wears down quicker. Whereas the Marshall tan will probably be good for 20 to 40 years, a carbon is probably only really good for 15 to 20. That said, what do we prefer? Well, we prefer, or at least I do, I prefer the carbon steel trowel. Why? Well, because for most of the time for us, we actually end up losing a rivet on the trowel and the trowel becomes useless before the trowel has worn out and is no longer any use. In fact, the reason why this one is so new is because the one we had before this, which was 7 years old, it actually popped its rivet. So when a trowel takes 4 to 5 years to break in and then you lose the rivet after 7 years, well, as soon as the trowel became decent, it's then useless. Whereas with the carbon, with very little downtime, the trowel is usable. And if you do break a rivet within 7 to 10 years, it's no big loss. Switch it out, go and get a new one. But does that mean, just because we prefer a carbon trowel, that's what you should get? Well, the reason why we like them is because they give a good finish, because they don't take long to break in, and because we're heavy on our tools, they do tend to lose their rivets after however many years. But that's because we're using them every day. If you're not using these trowels every single day, we would thoroughly recommend getting a stainless steel trowel. Perhaps you're a DIYer at home and maybe you use a trowel once a year, or maybe a builder and you do a bit of plastering maybe once a week or once a month. The maintenance to keep up a carbon steel trowel, if left unmaintained, when you came back to it after a month, it would have substantial rust on it that you would have to sand off. It would come off if you were perhaps doing rendering with sand and cement, but it's an awful lot of work for a trowel that you're not using very often. Whereas a stainless steel trowel, you don't need to do any maintenance. You put it in a box, you come back to it a month later, it's in the same condition. For something that you're not going to get much use out of, you're not going to really notice that maybe the 5, 6, 7, 8 pound more expensive. For the less grief that it's in the same condition when you came back to it, it's definitely the one to go for. It's worth thinking about that there are pros and cons to both. We hope this is helpful in helping you understand the difference between the two trowels and the one that possibly you should buy for your own circumstances. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.